Hello, good afternoon. We'll be starting the webinar in about 1 to 2 minutes to allow people to log in. Thank you.
Thank you, Berkeley. Introduction here. So curation in general, and how JFrog is trying to attempting to solve this. How do we curate open source libraries or third-party or even first-party sources that are coming in and into your dev SecOps environment, and how do we curate that into the JFrog platform? But this webinar is going to focus on jumping, deep dive on some of those workflows that's involved here from an air gap scenario perspective. Again, I would like to point that this curation workflow was inspired by our friends at DoD who are actively trying to solve curation problem when running within an air gap environment. And I'm glad to be joined here by my colleague, Daniel Williams, who will be demonstrating some of these workflow. So again, JFrog mission is to power all the software updates in the world. And the way we are doing that is bringing what we call as order to the software chaos, bringing in this universe of technologies, different package manager, programming languages types, optimizing and standardizing on things like metadata, policies, processes, methods, and secrets into one single platform, what we call as JFrog platform, where we holistically look at artifacts, security, storage, optimization, automation, and distribution, all delivered in one single place, what we call as JFrog platform deployment. And you could seamlessly deliver this to devices, servers, teams, and customers. Again, at the center of our universe is JFrog Artifactory, where we store and manage all software packages type and also container images, right? All the way from your source code repository. Again, the services that what we have built around this Artifactory is what we call as JFrog Xray, which is a security and compliance issue tracker, along with focusing on software supply chain security. And we also have end-to-end CI/CD automation and orchestration solution built in within this platform called JFrog Pipelines. And insights and mission control are your performance monitoring, DevOps metrics, capturing that, and also managing centrally multiple JFrog platform deployments using JFrog Mission Control. Again, the JFrog Connect is our IoT story in terms of deploying and operating and monitoring software in edge IoT devices. But from this webinar perspective, we are going to be touching Artifactory, Xray, JFrog Pipeline, and JFrog distribution. Again, JFrog distribution is our answer for distributing artifacts securely from lower environments to the higher environments. And here we are going to demonstrate how we would be using what we call as a release bundle construct to manage to the ship artifacts from lower environment to higher environment securely. Again, we could we support multi-cloud and hybrid as well. And again, talking about the software, supply chain is basically composed of what we call as the components, libraries, tools, and the processes which were used to develop, build, and publish software artifacts. And this is critically important from today's discussion, from a fact that developers are pulling from public repository and again building a piece of software and releasing it. That involves things like configuring secrets and again at some point in the SDLC lifecycle you distribute right to the production. And again, distribution to the production means like to IoT devices or public or private cloud or and everything in between and or to the distributed edge. And I want to quickly level set on what we call as a JFrog Xray that is integrated into CI or CD, and we do scan a piece of software that Xray does and evaluates a policy check. And if there are any critical violation, you can take some automatic action. Again, I'm trying to level set these definitions here because we're going to see this in the demonstration here that one could prevent the download if there isn't any issue or fail a build or block distribution, right, in terms of the release bundle. Xray holistically looks at the security from a contextual analysis perspective to tell you not just the vulnerability and the license compliance issue, but also tells you exactly where the problem is with the software that you're packaging, looking at the threat model and how it could be exploited. And some of the recently added Xray features, including what I just talked about with enhanced CVE data. We also look at the malicious packages detection, operational risk, Jira integration, and industry standard, software bill of material or SBOM. Again, we are all here today to talk about zero trust verification with binary lifecycle management. And then if you look at the way the teams are formulated or operates with security, development team or ops or SRE, they all operate in silos. And with this SBOM is here with the United States executive order, we absolutely need to have a visibility into our SBOM and all the dependencies that it brings in, meaning a complete visibility will enable you in terms of risk awareness. And you need to have a tool that gives you ability to kind of decompose and look at every level of the piece of software that's involved. And then the way you do that is with what we call as binary lifecycle management, where you stand up write repositories with the Artifactory where developer would be interacting, and that write repository will be your source of truth in terms of what's getting built. And again, the SecOps, the persona will be deployed on what we call as an open repository, which is usually set up in a DMZ environment. And the self-service curation process and the workflow associated with which my buddy Daniel will be talking about is basically the interaction between the DevOps, a developer requesting a piece of software, and how that request ends up on this open repository. It goes to the internet, downloads the bed, applies the security ops policies against it, and then take a decision in terms of whether that piece of software should be available to the right repository or it should be blocked and isolated. And again, once the piece of software which is curated arrives in the right repository and SBOM is generated. And again, this process of what we call a shift left And then you could think about how do we deliver it, right, to the production environment, using what we call as a promotion to the read archive repositories, which is basically Artifactory edge server that would be involved in distributing the piece of software to your runtime for your production use. And this is what we call as a ship right. This will give you end-to-end capability of vetting a software component that comes from outside to all the way to your running your piece of software in Kubernetes or in your production runtime. So the crux of this presentation is one slide, and we are going to dive deeper into what this means. Again, if you remember from the webinar number 1, the difference is we are focusing on secure environment. This could be your air-gapped, classified environments where your JPD would be running with Artifactory, Xray pipeline, and distribution. And when the developer requests a piece of software, there are 4 different workflows that gets kicked in. And one is the preparation workflow, where the request to prepare what software that needs to be downloaded and curated is done using prepare workflow. And then a curation workflow in the external environment. This could be a lower level environment where you would actually be setting this curation up. And this curation workflow will kick in, and then it'll go do a bunch of things that, again, Daniel will cover, which is basically downloading the piece of software from internet and then running the security scans, making sure you can approve or disapprove the piece of software based on the Xray findings. And then once you prepare the piece of software that needs to be transferred back to the secure environment, you can use this bundle workflow to bundle it, right? And then the last piece of workflow is how do you load this back into the JPD so that your end developer will get notified, and then they can start running their CI build. Again, all of these workflows are pretty much the workflows that runs over on top of JPDs, and Daniel will take it from here and talk through what exactly that needs to be done here in terms of the use case and what the workflow looks like. So Daniel, take it away, and thank you for doing this work.
Thank you, Sudhindra. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Get that out of the way. All right, so Sudhindra gave a quick rundown of the high level here, and I'm going to go into more detail on each of these. In part 1, we focused a lot on what the curation workflow is and what it did. I'll go ahead and touch on it again. But this, in part 2, I want to focus on the other workflows and then bring it all together in a complete process. So looking first at the prep workflow, the preparation workflow, the idea here is that if the development's happening in the secure environment, or really wherever the development is happening, developers are going to need packages. With the modern development processes, you don't write everything from scratch like you used to do back in the day. Now everything is built on top of libraries, built on top of other libraries. So those packages need to be brought in, but they need to be requested. The developer has to decide what needs to be brought in the first place. This can be handled in a number of different environments. Originally, in planning this webinar, I was going to set up a pipeline to gather these requirements in Artifactory's pipelines and then store it in JFrog's pipelines and store it in Artifactory. However, in talking to customers working through this, most of our customers that have worked on this type of a workflow end up using some other system of record. An example would be, say, ServiceNow or Jira, something that meets their ISO or other regulatory compliance. So For this, I'm actually going to start the demonstration at the manifest to be carried. But we could use a pipeline to gather these requests. We could use ServiceNow, and all of this can be automated. One of our other customers used ServiceNow, built a workflow in there where the developer puts in a request, it's recorded, but then automatically the information is pulled from that and pushed directly into the next step we'll talk about, which is the curation workflow. But this part of the process has to be handled. And it really depends on your processes on how you gather those, what packages from your developers. And then you want to take those and assemble them all into a manifest, a list of what needs to be brought in. I would look at something like a nightly process. So developers send in the requests, and then at night, trigger off one manifest, and that can be carried, or maybe at the end of day. And again, a lot of this depends on how secure this environment is, if it has to be physically carried. We'll talk more about that later in the process, but if it can be automated, it can be pushed straight into the curation workflow. If there's an actual physical man trap style air gap, this would have to be outputted as a file. I'm using JSON, and then that file would have to be physically carried over to the low side environment where the curation can happen, and then loaded in. Now on the low side environment, we have that manifest being carried in. It'll get submitted to a pipeline. And again, I used JFrog pipelines because I'm from JFrog and it's the tool I have readily available. This could be pipeline on something like Jenkins or Circle CI or any number of other CI/CD pipelining systems. But the steps that we have to go through, we have to take that manifest in, we have to process that manifest to find all the dependencies. Because a lot of times, right, your Docker file or your Python package isn't just that one Docker image or that one Python package. It's going to have a number of dependencies of its own, and those dependencies may have dependencies. So you have to work through that process. Once you have that list of dependencies, you'll want to curate each one of those. The initial design used Xray. Just recently, JFrog released a curation product. So the updated design would, when you go to implement this, would be to use curation initially to keep things from coming into the environment, into even this environment, and then anything that curation can't handle or hasn't caught would then get scanned by Xray, just as a double check. And then at that point, it would be curated, and we would copy those into a local repository flag to say, this is what's been curated, this is what's safe. Any failures would be recorded, and then we could trigger the workflow. In my example, I'm actually using cron to trigger the bundling workflow, but you could do it if you had like a single nightly process. You could have that just trigger that other workflow. The bundle workflow is going to take that trigger and it's going to go gather everything from that curated repository, or in this case, multiple curated repositories, depending on the package types. We're using the release bundle that's built into JFrog's distribution functionality in the JPD. Create that release bundle and then download that release bundle to be carried into the environment. Because I have one computer here for the webinar, I'm not actually going to put it on a USB and walk it to another computer. But you would do that. I will show where it's downloaded, and then I will change over to another environment, our high side environment, and then I will upload it back, showing that that's being carried across. This bundling, like I said, I'm using the release bundle functionality in the JFrog distribution package. It could be done right in the pipeline. You could have your pipeline go through and download each file and make an ISO. You could just export the entire repository or set of repositories, burn those to a DVD or a USB and carry those across. But some features of the release bundle, and I'll point this out when we look through it, is the release bundle is signed by a GPG key. It's immutable. It can't be changed, or you'll know something changed. It has all the information about all of the different artifacts that are in that bundle, their SHA-1, their SHA-512 SHA, so you can see if it's been changed. And like I said, it's signed, it's a complete, and it's one complete bundle. It's one file, even for multiple repositories, that can then be carried across, and then it will be verified on the end when it's loaded back in. And speaking of loaded back in, back on our high side environment, that release bundle needs to be loaded back in. And so again, we're using release bundles. So we can just import the release bundle into Artifactory, into distribution, and it will handle the verification, and it will handle putting all of those pieces into the correct repositories, so they're all available and the developers can just use them. I haven't automated the notifications, but in an actual live system, you would want to have some sort of notification at the end to let the developer know, hey, your requested dependencies are now available. And again, that would likely be through some sort of external system like a ServiceNow or a Jira, right? We're going to go ahead and close out the ticket and send a notification. But JFrog's platform can actually send the notifications directly if you wish it to. So that's our 4 workflows. I'm going to hop out of the presentation and let's go in to our external or our low side environment. So bringing in the initial, that initial manifest comes into a pipeline. And again, I'm going to go quickly through this piece of it because we touched on it in part 1. I have 2 pipelines here, gated pipeline, gated Docker, that go through and actually handle the curation process. And in this particular case, I have these pipelines set up to copy the requested resources or the requested artifacts from the remote where the let's call it filtering, the curation, the filtering happens, into a local. And I'll show that here real quick. So here I'm looking at the remote. So this is where the Docker images get pulled in from the external resources and are then scanned by Xray. And then up here I have the local where they're copied to. And one thing you can see here is I've attempted to pull a number of different images here. So if we're looking at Python, there's 3 Python Docker images, 311 Alpine, 311 Buster, and 39 Alpine. If we go back up and look at the local, what's successfully passed through with 0 violations, the only one we have here is 311 Alpine. And so that shows that there's filtering. And now any request here, or when we're making the release bundle, it will only pull from here, and then that prevents any chance of these other ones getting through. Now I'm going to go ahead. This is our 3.9 Alpine image, and we can see there's 1 violation. And I'm going to go ahead and approve this. So we'll see this vulnerability, this version of PyPy, this image name for the watch, put a note in for testing. I could make an expiration, but this is a demo environment. It won't last long enough to need an expiration. But you could set an expiration to say approve for 4 weeks, and then force a different, like, fail it again, and then that would force the developer to go to a more updated version. All right. So now that shows no violations. I'm going to come back to my pipelines page, and I'm actually going to run. So showing the manifest here, So this is the manifest I'm using for Docker. It just shows the Alpine latest, Python 3.11, Python 3.9, and a random image I developed years ago as an example at. These were ones that were attempted before. The Alpine latest and the Python 3.11 both worked. The Alpine or the Python 3.9 and the other image didn't. They were blocked due to security issues, Xray violations. So let's see here, run the Docker. And just to show that real quick, this is, in this case, I'm just pushing that particular manifest into a webhook that triggers the pipeline. This is something that could be handled completely automatically from some sort of other ticketing system or from a workflow upstream. It could also be done right here through the UI. So now that that's running and it succeeded, but you could load that, run it right here in the UI if you're carrying it manually over. Going in here, we'll check the status. This is all of the debug logging for all of the image copying. So now, because I passed that violation, we can see the 3.9 Alpine curation was successful. But here we can see, I'm just going to highlight this, we can see that Xray still found issues with this other service, and it still failed it, and it said, don't let it through. So now going back up here, I'm going to go ahead and refresh. Pictures are in the way. Refresh. And now we can see in the scanned Docker local, this is the approved, the successfully curated, the approved. We can now see 3.9 Alpine is in here. So now that's the curation complete. We have the images. The next step, the bundling, we handle over here in distribution. So I have, actually, let me go back to the pipelines real quick. So I have this release bundle process that actually, it's an automated bundling process that goes through and creates release bundles. And again, it goes through and it runs the AQL and it creates the release bundle and it shows, hey, these are all the things I found. The operation was successful. So this I have currently running, for the sake of this demo, I have running once an hour on a cron job to create a lot of bundles. This would be something that could be triggered off of the curation workflow. It could be triggered off of a cron, once a night. It could be something that you run manually. In fact, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to run it manually because I think the curation I just ran, I think just barely missed the time. So run it manually. If you don't want to have it running automatically every so often, it goes through, it creates the release bundle, and then we'll go look at that release bundle and see that it's been generated. There we go, processing. It should be quick. There we go, it's done. And we can see it's successful. It created another release bundle. Again, debug logging, listing out everything that's in there. So if we go to distribution, and I'm going to go ahead and reload this page to check the latest version. All right, we have a new version. So that was this example bundle that was created. So you can see here, I've been doing it every hour on the 21st minute, and then this is the one I just did manually. One thing to look at here, this was everything with the 3.11 Alpine, the Alpine, or 3.11 Python, the Alpine latest, and 4 Python packages. Now that we have the 3.9 Python Docker image in there, we can see this version, the size has gone up. Coming into the release bundle, and this is why we use release bundles, you can see there's content tracking. So we have these Docker layers for the Alpine. We now have more Docker layers, including the 3.9 Python image, but we have more layers being included. And we still have the 4 Python packages. The reason these are all still being included is they've been touched in the last 24 hours, and my query for building the bundle says, look for anything in the Docker and the Python repositories. I'm using 2 to show you can do multiple repositories. Look for anything newer than, in this case, it would be yesterday at 6:30, because UTC, which would be, 1 day ago from 2 minutes ago when I ran the pipeline. And then this is actually ignoring an internal file that gets picked up in this that we don't need to carry along. And then it includes all of that. So that's the query, but we can see there's all of this included. If there was any builds or any other things like that, here is the list of all of the files and their hashes and all of the information about what's included, right? Checksums, contents, things like that, that's included in this release bundle. So it's showing this is the contents of everything. And then it's signed. It can't be changed because it is signed. It also includes the Xray data about everything that was in here. Well, I don't have scanning on it right now, but you can Xray scan the bundle after it's created. I know all the content is good because I Xray scanned it beforehand. And then that was the query. So, and then, like I say, it's signed, it's ready to distribute, and it's signed by a GPG key. And then so to export it, normally you would hit distribute version. And if we had a bunch of other systems like edge nodes or PDN or things like that, because it's a connected environment, those would show up here. But because we're doing air gap, we're going to come up to version. We're going to export the version. It'll take a few minutes to build the export. And then we're going to, there it is, download that export. And if you can see right down here, we have our 39.6 megabyte bundle, and it just downloaded as it's Google Chrome's taking its time to complete it. Come on, Chrome. But we'll see when that's downloaded. Here we go. All right, now there's that bundle completed. And so our last phase is loading it into the other environment. So I'm going to take this bundle and I'm going to minimize this one, and we're going to bring up another environment. So this is simulating a high side environment. This is actually a completely isolated environment, except for one SSH tunnel that I have into the network. So that way I can actually get to the UI for this demo. But other than that, there is no traffic from this environment allowed outside. We'll go look at our artifacts, and we can see we have the scan Docker local and the scan PyPy local. We'll expand this up and we'll be able to see there's the Alpine latest and there's the Python 3.11. That's what we had before. So now to load this up, distribution, received. And again, these pieces I kept manual because honestly, it's very easy. There really isn't much to automate here unless you're trying to add in a bunch of extra notifications or record of system of record or anything like that. But we can see here we've got one from earlier, import, select file. We'll pick this bundle that I just downloaded, right? So this would be basically, I downloaded it. I could say I put it on a USB stick, carried it to another workstation, carried it through the man trap, and now I'm on the other workstation. I'm just finding it, right? USB or CD, go find it, hit open, hit import, and now it's gonna go into this environment. And again, other than my one connection to the web UI, there is no external connections to this environment going in or going out. All right, it says, depending on how big it is, it may take some time. We can see the versions updated. And now if I go back here to artifacts, We'll open up because we know we got the new Python image. And there it is. The 3.9 image is now in our completely isolated system, and not just the 3.9 list, but also the actual 3.9 image with all of its layers that's brought in. And I've done that, again, showing these PyPy. These are the other packages that were in there. And the distribution system is smart enough to see, oh, the 3.11 Alpine was in there, but all the checksums matched. It just re-verified it instead of, it didn't cause any conflicts, didn't cause any issues. It just said, yep, that's still there. That still looks good. We're going to keep it. But then it added in the 3.9. And now we have this in our isolated high side environment. And it was one bundle carried through. Now, any developer that's in that secure environment can use this as a Docker repository or this as a PyPy for pip install repository. And these packages are available. And they can just use them in that environment now. And we have the traceability, we have the checksums, we have the signing. That's one thing. These are all verified by GPG keys. So we know that this bundle hasn't been tampered with in carrying it along. So we know there's traceability from the time the request started in the curation workflow. Pulled those down, we verified them, we have the Xray history over there, bundled them, we have the signed bundle, carried it into this environment, deployed it in, we have a verified bundle using the GPG key. In fact, I'll go show the GPG key. So if we come into key management, public keys, here's the key I'm using for signing. So this is the public key that it matches the private key that was installed on the other environment to sign it and verify it. If I didn't have this public key loaded, it would actually fail the verification saying, hey, there's no keys to verify this package. So we have that traceability, we have that verification all the way along on each file and on the bundle, and we know nothing's been tampered with into this environment. And that's the huge, powerful piece here. We can carry it as a single bundle across the air gap, and we can have traceability. We can have verification across that air gap with this distribution feature. Like I said, you can do it manually, but the distribution feature is here, and it makes life really easy and really secure. Are there any questions on that point? I feel like I went through that quicker than I was expecting. One last thing to touch on. For the developer experience, this is what the developer experience will end up being. Developer requests a package, gets back a 404. Hey, it's not in this environment. So then they trigger, a request, right, into that prep workflow, whether it's an external system, pipeline, and then they have to wait a certain amount of time. And then they would get some sort of notification back, some sort of response to that initial request. And then they would be able to go pull that package, and that package is available. And that, other than the time wait, is a really simple experience for the developer. And it's very automatable, other than physically carrying through, a man trap or something like that. It's completely automatable through the JPD. So that is the complete process that we're at here. Again, there's a lot of little details that we'll have to work out for your particular environment and your particular processes. We wanted to show a high level, yes, this can be done. Yes, we've done it. Yes, we know how to do it. And then if there's any questions or any desire to dig into this further, we're happy to sit down and talk through this or any number of other scenarios with you and how it would be done, and work with you, and truthfully, let's get it built and make it happen.
Here's a couple of questions. How do you ensure the artifacts are secured when in transit from lower to higher environments?
Sure. So as I was saying, The bundles are signed. So we saw that it's the zip file that we download. That zip file is signed with a PGP key. Let's see here, go into key management. So we can see here there's a PGP key, and this is used for signing. It's used for a number of things in here, but one of those is signing the release bundle, and that ensures that there's no tampering. In fact, let me see if I go to the high side and see if I can demonstrate this. I will delete my PGP key out, and then let's go try and let's go back to here, release bundles. I will delete this older version we just uploaded out. That's fine. All right, so we're back to the older version. I'm going to upload it again. Select file, and now we don't have a PGP key. It'll upload it. Takes a minute to upload. And it should come back and say, verification failed, can't find key. There we go. Could not find public GPT trusted with this key ID because I deleted, I don't have a key in here. And that shows that the bundle has to be verified. So before it'll actually let that bundle into this high side environment, it makes sure it has the key that you loaded, and it makes sure it verifies that bundle to make sure there's been no tampering with it. So GPG, open source, signed package, tampering. And then I was also showing inside of the bundle, let's go back to low side distribution. Inside of these bundles, there is a full, here we go, release bundle info. There's this full manifest included in the bundle that shows every single thing that should be in there and all of the checksums for every one of those to make sure that they haven't been tampered with. It also includes some other data, like any kind of properties or anything like that, but it goes this repository, this file, this checksum, here's what we should be looking for, here's the file type, here's what's expected. All of this is to verify that those artifacts coming out of the one environment in the bundle are the same going into, so they can be verified. So that's how distribution basically validates that nothing's been tampered with from the point it comes out of one Artifactory and into the other. And similar systems are used internally in the Artifactories in the databases to make sure none of the files have been tampered with. Multiple checksums internally, and verification. Every time a file is tried to be downloaded, those checksums are validated to make sure that there's been no tampering or no issues in storage. Make sure that what you're getting is exactly what your Artifactory is intending to give you.
Okay, couple more questions. Do workflows need to be built, and how do you customize workflows? Okay,
so I'm using workflow as a more generic term of like steps that need to be done. They can be built a number of ways in a number of places. Pipelines is a tool I'm using to build the curation workflow and the create release bundle workflow. And the way JFrog Pipelines does it is they store everything in a Git repo. So this is the one I'm using. It's a private one, but it's just in GitHub. And then the JFrog pipelines here are the actual definition of the pipelines. Yes, you will need to build these because these tend to be very customized for your particular environment, your particular processes. But we're happy to provide the examples like the ones here and some other examples we have. But then you define your resources. So in this case, here's the webhook that triggers this particular flow. Here's the pipeline, the steps. And in this case, I'm calling a Python script that I wrote, which is also in here, which is this Python script. that just goes through and it logs into Docker, pulls the images down with Docker, it verifies that the pull is successful and Xray says it's good, and then copies it to the other repository from the remote to the scanned local where we know everything there is good. And it does that copy, and then it outputs at the end. Honestly, most of that is logging. It outputs at the end, in this case, success and failure. I'm just printing that to the screen or logging it. But this is where it could go back into like a ticketing system, or it could go for notifications, things like that with this summary data. But yes, you will have to build these pipelines, these workflows for your environment. But like I said, we have examples and we're more than happy to share those, and we're more than happy to help you build those so they're focused on your specific needs, your specific requirements, your specific policies and procedures. Because we know in this case, there's, depending on what kind of regulatory environment you're in, is going to change the specifics around these. But overall, the workflow, the steps that need to go through are the same.
Okay, so that concludes our Q&A for today. Any other inputs to summarize this webinar, gentlemen? Okay.
I don't have anything.
Yeah, I just want to say a couple of things, Berkeley. Just as I indicated in the beginning of this webinar, this was actually inspired by a couple of DoD agencies who are trying to solve this actively, and this is the workflow that we have developed this together. But again, this use case of curation, especially when in an air gap environment, is what everybody across DoD and other agencies who are actively looking at. And I hope this approach of solving this problem is helpful, and any feedback on this is greatly appreciated.
Okay. Thank you, Sudhindra and Daniel. I appreciate it. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks for joining. Bye.
Thank you.